You see Joe Biden is involved in the business. He's making phone calls. He's making appearances. Money is coming in and exchanging hands. Shortly after phone calls, shortly after Joe Biden goes to a restaurant to meet with the wife of the former mayor of Moscow, one of the biggest oligarchs in Russia, $3.5 million right into the Biden coffers. They're receiving literally millions of dollars, all linked to this. So we say, well, my friends across the aisle say, well, there's no evidence here. There's nothing here to be seen. But Devon Archer was testifying to that. There are other witnesses that I don't think you've paid attention to who've also said Joe Biden was the brand. He was the product they were selling. Yeah, so you got that on one side. So the question is, can that be corroborated? Then you get a 1023. By the way, the FBI should give us the underlying 1023, which explains why they went ahead with this 1023. Now, the chairman, yeah, there was another 1023, which
Nobody's told me that yet.
Yes, there was. And it's why they went ahead with this interview. So, great minds think alike, I guess. I actually underlined the same provisions that the chairman did. The former president or prime minister of Poland and Joe Biden's son, Hunter Biden, Wojcicki said Burisma hired the former president or prime minister of Poland. So you get the prime minister of Poland hired to leverage what? The EU folks. But what was Hunter hired for? To, quote, protect us through his dad from all kinds of problems, close quote. Now, I won't go through the rest of this, but because it also corroborates what Devon Archer was talking about. Hunter Biden's dad was the product. And what was he expected to do? He was expected to do things like was explained in here by a reliable source, to take care of Viktor Shulkin. So what else did Devon Archer talk about? He's in Dubai with Hunter Biden. They're at the sailboat typey hotel. They're there, and they're with the president and CEO of Burisma, as well as the treasurer of Burisma. And what are they talking about? Oh my gosh, we're having trouble getting our IPO out because Viktor Shulkin, the AG in Ukraine, is basically going after them. Devon Archer says they excused themselves, and Hunter goes and calls his dad because that's what the CEO of Burisma said, please do. We need help from your dad. We have a recess. They come back. Well, maybe it was just to D.C. What confirms that? The 1023. Don't say there's no corroborating evidence implicating Joe Biden. It's all in this 1023 and Devon Archer's testimony. And then you start using all the other documentation to show very clearly a criminal conspiracy of bribery and selling access on the part of the Biden family. I'll yield to the gentleman from North Carolina.
I thank the gentleman from Arizona. And I'm struck, and I'm going to maybe get a chance in a minute, but the continued contention that there's no evidence because the CHS doesn't know whether what Zlochevsky and Prigozhin said was true or not, even though they seemed credible. That's not how this works. Unfortunately, I'm out of time. I'll explain it in a minute, but we got my truth, your truth. We really don't have differing definitions of evidence. It means something, and we'll talk about that.
The gentleman's time has expired from Arizona. The gentleman from North Carolina is recognized for 5 minutes on the amendment, and then we'll have the vote on the amendment.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. So let's talk about that just a little bit more. Evidence, this is not, actually everybody thinks this can sound lawyerly, but it's just very straightforward. Evidence is anything that comes within the rules of admissibility that tends to make any matter, any proposition, more probable or less probable. Meaning that it has probative force, tends to prove one way or the other. And they have all these rules in evidence about when somebody who's not in court and says something that was said out of court wants to testify about that, when that can be allowed. And here we have what's called, it looks like preliminarily a double hearsay problem. The CHS is not here testifying. And Prigozhin and Zlochevsky, the guys who say they paid a bribe, certainly aren't here. But what this is a situation. Let me give you a hypothetical, slightly different situation. Let's assume it's not the confidential human source, or the confidential human source isn't having a conversation with Prigozhin and Zlochevsky, but he's somewhere nearby, and he hears them talking. He eavesdrops on them, and they're talking about having paid bribes to Hunter Biden and Joe Biden of $5 million each. Now, in that situation also, the person in the position of the CHS, the eavesdropper, would not know whether Zlochevsky and Prigozhin are being truthful or not in saying they paid bribes, but that does not mean it is not evidence. It is evidence. And it comes in through the hearsay rules because those people are describing a criminal conspiracy. The statements of a co-conspirator are so-called admissions of a party opponent. They come in through that rule. This is straight up, direct evidence of bribery. Now, you can say, if you want to, that you're not persuaded by the direct evidence, the person admitting that they committed a bribe or undertook a bribery scheme, but it's not evidence. So you could say, well, I think there's evidence, and it's admissible evidence, and a jury would be well-founded deciding on the basis of that evidence to convict for bribery, but I'm not going to do an investigation anyway. I'm not going to support bringing in the witness who is defying the subpoena of the Congress because I'm just not persuaded by that direct evidence of bribery. I understand that would be a contention you can make. But again, even in this age when you talk about, I want you to tell your truth and I'm going to tell my truth, which is abysmal and absurd on its face, I didn't know that we had started changing the definition of evidence. But there is evidence. And even to those people who say, well, it sounds like it's circumstantial evidence and indirect evidence. Well, by the way, lots of people were convicted on circumstantial and indirect evidence. But that's not the case either here. When the bribery conspirator is overheard or is heard saying, I engaged in a bribe with that person, that's direct evidence of bribery. And so, and I'm, in terms of credibility, again, I'd love to evaluate the confidential human source. I think the country ought to get the chance to evaluate the confidential human source in this case. It's that important. But if you want to say, and again, what's in the FBI and the United States Attorney have both evaluated him, they tell us, and they say this confidential human source is credible. So if he were in the situation of being an eavesdropper, that means he really did what he says he really heard what he says he heard. So some people won't be satisfied no matter what evidence is offered, and that's clear. But there's lots of evidence. And with that, I'd like to yield to the gentleman from New Jersey, Mr. Van Drew.
I thank the gentleman from North Carolina. I wanted to reference a remark made by my colleague, the gentlelady from Ms. Dean. She says she's worried about guns, and we need more gun legislation. I'm worried about guns too, but we don't need more gun legislation on legal gun owners. But we do need to address issues like Hunter Biden, and we need to prosecute people like that who criminally falsify an application for a gun. These aren't talking points, this is the truth. Who criminally was drunk and high while purchasing said weapons, who criminally and illegally disposed of guns and was to be exonerated in a special plea deal. Talk about justice not being fair for everyone. God help anybody who did that who wasn't the president's son. That's what I worry about, and that's what Americans worry about. I yield back.
Gentleman, time has expired. The question occurs on the amendment from the gentlelady from Texas. All those in favor say aye. Aye. All those opposed, no. No. In the opinion of the chairs, the noes have it. A roll call being requested. The clerk will call the roll.
Mr. Jordan?
No.
Mr. Jordan votes no. Mr. Issa? Mr. Issa votes no. Mr. Buck? Mr. Gates? Mr. Biggs? Mr. Biggs votes no. Mr. McClintock? Mr. Tiffany? Mr. Tiffany votes no. Mr. Massey? Mr. Roy? Mr. Bishop? Mr. Bishop votes no. Ms. Spartz? Ms. Spartz votes no. Mr. Fitzgerald? Mr. Benz? Mr. Benz votes no. Mr. Klein? Mr. Armstrong? Mr. Armstrong votes no. Mr. Gooden? Mr. Gooden votes no. Mr. Van Drew? Mr. Van Drew votes no. Mr. Nels? Mr. Moore? Mr. Kiley? Mr. Kiley votes no. Ms. Hageman? Ms. Hageman votes no. Mr. Moran? Ms. Lee? Mr. Hunt? Mr. Fry? Mr. Fry votes no. Mr. Nadler?
Aye.
Mr. Nadler votes aye. Ms. Lofgren? Ms. Lofgren votes aye. Ms. Jackson Lee? Ms. Jackson Lee votes aye. Mr. Cohen? Mr. Johnson? Mr. Schiff? Mr. Schiff votes aye. Mr. Swalwell? Mr. Liu? Ms. Jayapal? Ms. Jayapal votes aye. Mr. Correa? Ms. Scanlon? Mr. Neguse? Ms. McBath? Ms. Dean? Ms. Dean votes aye. Ms. Escobar? Ms. Ross? Ms. Ross votes aye. Ms. Bush? Mr. Ivy? Ms. Ballant? Ms. Ballant votes aye.
McClintock, no.
Mr. McClintock votes no. Mr. Gates votes no.
Does anyone else wish to record their vote? Clerk will report.
Mr. Chairman, there are 8 ayes and 15 noes.
The amendment is not agreed to. You got an amendment? Oh, okay. Gentlelady from Pennsylvania is recognized.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I have an amendment at the desk.
Clerk will report. Gentleman from Arizona reserves.
Amendment to the amendment in the nature of a substitute to the committee report for the resolution recommending that the House of Representatives find Robert
Objection. The amendment will be considered as read. The gentlelady is recognized to explain her amendment.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. This amendment would add to the scope of the report's investigation what the majority says is necessary to inform our legislative work. For example, finding examples of possible enrichment of president's family members. I believe it's worth reading my brief amendment because I'm pretty sure you're all going to be convinced we should add this. On page 10, insert after the sentence beginning Mr. Biden's deposition is critical. Add the following. The committee also intends to investigate former President Trump's son-in-law and senior advisor, Jared Kushner. In particular, the committee must understand Jared Kushner's receipt of $2 billion from the Saudi Arabian government for his private equity firm just 6 months after leaving the White House. As these relationships were fostered during his tenure as a public official with a top security clearance while he worked for his father-in-law, former President Trump, on the issues relating to the Middle East. It is imperative for the committee to investigate his actions and role. In particular, the committee must understand if Jared Kushner leveraged his relationship with his father-in-law to secure large payments from foreign governments. Doing so would allow the committee to shape effective and targeted legislation and solutions that would expose and thus hopefully deter attempts at influence peddling by similarly situated family members, including activities that could jeopardize national security. Specifically, it would include the $2 billion that former senior advisor to President Trump, Jared Kushner, he served from 2017 until 2021 in the White House, his private equity firm received from a fund managed by Saudi Arabian Crown Prince, often called MBS. These payments are detailed in the recent report released by House Oversight Democrats led by Mr. Raskin, which found that former President Donald Trump violated our Constitution repeatedly while in office, placing himself and his financial interests above the law. To quote just a moment in the report, quote, Jared Kushner has also richly monetized his business ties with Saudi Arabia, reportedly with the direct assistance of MBS. The day after his service in the Trump administration ended, Mr. Kushner formed a company that became a private equity firm called Affinities Partners, aptly named. And within 6 months after leaving the White House, Mr. Kushner secured an investment reportedly worth $2 billion from Saudi Arabia's sovereign wealth fund, end quote. Of course, the $2 billion investment in Kushner's firm is separate from the more than $615,000 in unconstitutional emoluments received from Saudi Arabia during the Trump presidency. The total the former president likely received is far more than what the report uncovers and documents and proves. $7.8 million from at least 20 different companies during his time in office. That's just 2 years, by the way, of this report, and just 4 of his hotels, not the other hundreds of business entities. You know, I agree with the majority on one thing. Our laws should deter foreign interests from attempting to obtain influence over and access to the highest levels of federal government, end quote. Absolutely. If my colleagues are truly interested in strengthening our safeguards against undue foreign influence and not just benefiting Donald Trump, I have no doubt, Mr. Chairman, that this amendment will pass. In the meantime, I seek unanimous consent to enter into the record the report entitled White House for Sale, How Princes, Prime Ministers, and Premiers Paid Off President Trump.
Objection.
I also seek unanimous consent to enter into the record this article entitled Oversight Democrats release report proving Trump pocketed millions from at least 20 foreign governments as president.
Without objection.
Mr. Chairman, I am so looking forward to unanimous support. After all, Jared Kushner was not a private citizen. He served in the White House for 4 years as senior advisor to a sitting president. All as the sitting president, his businesses and his families enjoyed violations of the Emoluments Clause, millions of dollars pouring into their own pockets. And one day after he leaves the White House service, Mr. Kushner begins Affinity Partners, and 6 months later has $2 billion in the account from Saudi Arabia. I yield back.
Gentlelady yields back. Does the gentleman insist the gentleman withdraws his point of order? I would just point out that this markup's about a report on contempt for Mr. Biden, not anything to do with Mr. Kushner. And I would also just say, I think in the gentlelady's amendment, the last line talks about things that could potentially jeopardize national security. Jared Kushner was one of the people who helped secure the Abraham Accords, which I think focused on peace and agreements and helping the Middle East. And frankly, what a contrast in the Trump administration with the Biden administration. I love the question former Secretary of State Mike Pompeo got when shortly after Russia invades Ukraine, he was asked, would this have happened in a Trump administration? I thought the former secretary gave the best answer. He said, the short answer is I don't know, but I do know this, it didn't happen in a Trump administration. And our best friend, dear friend, the state of Israel was not attacked in the Trump administration like they were a little over 3 months ago. Jared Kushner did great work, and to have this amendment makes absolutely no sense. So I would urge that the amendment be defeated. I would yield to the gentleman from Wisconsin, and then I'll recognize the ranking member.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. To the author of the amendment, may I pose a question to you? So do you have specific language around this? So the allegation is in regards to Jared Kushner. Do you have specific language around this to highlight how this is inappropriate and what we can do to create a bill that will deal with this? Is that included here at all?
The point is to say exactly that. We should investigate exactly the facts. We know the dates. We know the facts. We know the dollars. We know Jared Kushner's public service in the closest levels to the President of the United States. And as he walks out the door, he begins a business that later gets $2 billion from a foreign entity. All the while, during the administration pocketing millions and millions of dollars. I wonder, where was your outrage then? Where was your investigation then? When we saw in plain sight the President of the United States right down the street here at Trump International take in millions of dollars from foreign entities. That puts
I'll reclaim my time. reclaim my time. Thank you for that. We clearly did not get an answer there about specific language, so it was meant as just another hit piece here to try to obfuscate and not deal with the issue at hand, which is getting Hunter Biden here to fulfill a subpoena, right? I mean, that's ultimately what's happening, and you see this sleight of hand that's going on. But I will read from the 1023 document. Hunter Biden was stupid, and his dog, this would be Zlochevsky's, was smarter. Therein lies the difference between Jared Kushner and Hunter Biden. Hunter Biden didn't know how to run a business. Jared Kushner actually does. He knows how to finance a business. He knows how to operate successful businesses. That's the difference here. Mr. Chairman, I'll yield any time that you may want.
Yeah, I thank you for yielding. I would just ask the question, does anyone remember Hunter Biden going over to China, to Beijing in Air Force Two, and while his father was conducting official business, was meeting with business and potential business partners, and within a matter of a few months after returning, he received equity fund management in the amount of billions of dollars. Anyone else recall that, or is it just me? That is a true story, and I'm curious about the outrage by my colleagues across the aisle. I want to yield back to you, Mr. Tiffany.
I would yield to anyone else that cares for time. I yield back, Mr. Chairman.
Gentleman yields. Chair recognizes the ranking member, Mr. Nadler.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I have several comments. First of all, we don't actually know that Jared Kushner knows how to run a business. All we know is that after dealing with the Saudi Arabians from the White House, he got $2 billion. We don't know whether he knows how to run a business well or not. Number two, when you quote from that 1023, don't forget that the person who offered the 1023 said, I don't know whether this is true. The person who offered the 1023 said, I don't know whether this is true. So you can't depend on anything in that 1023. Third, as we said before, Hunter Biden has offered to testify before this committee. This committee has turned him down. He's offered to testify in public. He can do it under the same rules as a deposition, but he doesn't want his remarks to be cherry-picked and distorted for public release. And given the record of this committee, I don't blame him. 90 people have come in for transcribed interviews. The full text has been released for exactly one of them. The others have been selectively released, and we know some of that has been distorted with half sentences released and the other half sentence not released. For the committee to fully understand the scope of the issues that a report or legislation would respond to, the report must include examples of possible enrichment of President's family members, including Trump's son-in-law and former senior advisor Jared Kushner. And we know, by the way, that he was denied security clearance to become senior advisor, but that the president personally overruled that. Kushner's firm received $2 billion from illicit connections in the Middle East for his private equity firm, thanks to relationships he fostered while acting as a public official with a top security clearance on issues related to the region. This $2 billion investment came from a Saudi fund led by the Crown Prince. This investment accounts for the majority of Kushner's funds, approximately $3 billion in holdings, and raises very substantial concerns as to whether there was any form of quid pro quo for his funding secured during Kushner's term in the White House. In addition, as I said, Kushner's security clearance approval was fraught with controversy. In fact, it was not just fraught with controversy. It was disallowed until overruled by the president. And Kushner advocated heavily for Saudi Arabian interests when he was a policy advisor to the then president. And if we're going to have a balanced resolution, we should include this as well as the Hunter Biden thing. And let me mention one other thing. There was a special prosecutor appointed by Merrick Garland to deal with Hunter Biden. Hunter Biden may very well have committed crimes. I don't know. I hold no brief for him. But Hunter Biden is not an elected official. And there's been not one iota of evidence that anything that Hunter Biden did benefited the president or that the president was involved in any way, which is the only legitimate concern for this committee, whether the president was involved. And after all the investigations, there is not one iota of evidence that the president was involved in any way. I yield back. I'll yield to the gentleman from Tennessee.
Thank you. I heard some talk. It was kind of, I guess, just off the cuff, but it was about Hunter Biden's business experience and abilities compared to Jared Kushner's. 666 Fifth Avenue, which Jared Kushner bought at the height of the real estate boom, and then was saved when it was about to go broke by I think the Gutteries, who gave him the money in some type of transaction to save the building, was considered, I believe, Mr. Nadler, to be one of the worst real estate deals ever in the city of New York. Were you aware of that 666 Fifth Avenue deal?
I'm aware of that deal. It's in my district.
Yeah, 666. It's interesting, the numbers. And then he bought the New York Observer and bought it at a high price and sold it at just about a nothing price, garbage price, and he basically ruined that paper too. So I would submit without any particular regard or endorsement of Mr. Biden's business abilities, I think he's equal to Jared Kushner's.
Now you'll